Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healthcare AI Forum. My name is Yuan Luo, Chief AI Officer in the medical school and also Chair of the Advisory Board for the forum. Today, it's great pleasure that I introduce my great friend and colleague, Dr. Kristi Holmes. She's the Associate Dean for Knowledge Management and Strategy, Director of Galter Health Science Library and Learning Center, and Professor of Preventive Medicine in the Division of Health and Biomedical Informatics at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Holmes' work focused on the discovery and equitable access to knowledge through collaborative computational and social initiatives, including the role of repositories to enable fair data practice and a vibrant sharing ecosystem. She brings extensive experiences with highly collaborative technical information projects on the local, national, and international level. Now, without much further ado, let me welcome Dr. Holmes to the stage.
All right, thank you very much. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to thank the organizers for welcoming me. I think any opportunity we have to share and learn from one another is such a treat, and I can say that I've definitely done that from folks in this room and through this series myself. So I'm glad to be able to contribute to it. So as I was thinking about what to talk about today, as you know, there's a lot happening with artificial intelligence these days. I got to thinking about how we might be able to have a conversation about types of projects and ways of working that complement some of the really outstanding clinical AI projects that are happening on campus right now. So I wanted to share a few of our projects with you. I'm also hoping that we'll be able to have some discussion. So if you see something that you have questions about, or if you'd like to learn more, I welcome you to ask those questions. And without further ado, I'm going to be going through a bit of a bouquet of different types of projects, just to give you an understanding of the types of projects and activities that our team is involved with, and we can go from there. All right. So I've got a couple of disclosures. None of these are significant from a financial standpoint, but I will be talking about some of these projects. And so I just wanted to be clear about any conflicts of interest. So as we go through our discussion today, we're going to talk about four main things. Some of these are a little bigger than others. So I'm going to talk about research and research teams. I'm going to highlight a few projects. I cannot be in a situation where I am at a podium and not talk about open science and infrastructure. So I will do that. And then finally, I'm going to end on some comments about how we build a strong foundation for this kind of work. So first and foremost, I think everyone who is paying attention to modern biomedical research understands that research is a team sport. So here we have the wonderful Chicago sky. And you know that when you think about basketball, you see all of the different positions coming together to orchestrate a very deliberate set of activities to achieve the goal. And so that's, scoring points, preventing the other team from scoring points, and everything that's involved with the basketball game. And so research is very much the same. In research, we also have a huge team. The team is bigger than the 5 people on the court in basketball. So you can see we've outlined a few different types of roles that are involved in modern biomedical research here. This is by no means all-inclusive. I'm sure that there are roles that I'm missing, but what I wanted to be able to do is just to really emphasize that idea that it's more than just the person in the white coat who is behind the research. It's everyone. It's the folks who work in the core research facilities. It's my favorite role type, which is librarians. It's collaborators, members of the community, the patients, folks who are involved with research integrity and research ethics, database administrators, every kind of role that comes together and contributes to a research project or research infrastructure and initiatives is essential for making that happen. So now I want to talk about some project highlights. And so in the projects that I'm about to share, some of them, it's a bit of a sampling. So we'll look at some key initiatives here at Feinberg School of Medicine. I'll highlight a couple of great projects that have to do with an ethical intersection with artificial intelligence, and then also highlight a few projects that are currently underway. So it is my pleasure to actually share one of the most recent collaborative efforts, which is this paper, Northwestern University Resource and Education Development Initiatives to Advance Collaborative Artificial Intelligence Across the Learning Health System. This project was led by Yuan, and as you can see from this screenshot of the paper, you can see it definitely took a team. So this is a really terrific paper where we go through and think about some of the different infrastructures and motivations across different roles and activities on campus to be able to nurture that environment of the learning health system where you are able to establish questions, research, data that informs learning and continuous improvement as we continue to evolve this AI space for our campus and beyond. Okay, the next of these was motivated. So at the time that ChatGPT launched about a year and a half ago, I think the world was really almost taken by surprise because it was so quickly accessible, and it was democratized artificial intelligence, right? Everyone had it in their hands and were able to kick the tires and begin to see what this new thing was all about. And so a number of us in this room actually were part of a panel discussion on campus shortly after it launched. And as part of that, and as motivated from that activity, we sent out a survey to understand user perspectives about using generative AI tools such as ChatGPT in activities such as education, healthcare, and research. So the two images that I have on the screen, the word clouds, one is we're looking at some of the challenges or concerns about using this type of a technology in research. And then of course, on the other side of the coin, we have panel B, which is what are we getting when we use these types of technologies? And I think it's one of the most significant to me, or my significant observations from Cloud B is how large efficiency is. I think it really just underscores how these kinds of technologies can step in and support the way we work in more efficient ways. Obviously, with the concerns being held in front as we're thinking about how we have challenges with bias or other types of issues that pop up. Okay, this project, the ethical considerations in utilizing artificial intelligence for analyzing the National Human Genome Research Institute's History of Genomics and the Human Genome Project archives. The first thing I want to point out here is the author list on the right-hand side. This was a fantastic collaboration and a really interesting dive into ethical considerations of using artificial intelligence or natural language processing for looking at digital art objects. This really intersected, I think, nicely with some of the things that we're thinking about in the libraries, because we do have archives, we do have materials that are being digitized, and we're thinking about many different ethical considerations as we imagine not only the digitizing, but also the parsing of those contents and what to make available. It's a huge ethical issue, and as such, we obviously had to get IRB approval in order to do this work. So in this work, we're really trying to understand, the point of this work is to understand how scientific knowledge is produced. And I think we can all understand that as we're thinking about the production of scientific knowledge, being able to optimize that process is paramount, right? So we want to be able to make this an efficient and effective process so that we can leverage our learnings, the things that we are able to understand in terms of how to make this process move as smoothly as possible, because it does impact the development of other projects and other knowledge sorts of efforts. So in this initiative, we used artificial intelligence and large language models to create a structured digital representation of the historic archives of the National Human Genome Research Institute. The work yielded digital knowledge base of entities, topics, and documents that can be used to probe the inner workings of the project, as well as some of the subsequent projects that came from that initiative. So I'd like to point out our colleagues on this. You can see I worked with Mohammed Hosseini, who is a new assistant professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine here at Feinberg. Spencer Hong in chemical and biological engineering, Chris Vetterstrand and Christopher Donahue from NHGRI, Dr. Amaral from chemical and biological engineering, and Thomas Stoger from the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine. So it really shows that it takes a team to be able to do this kind of project. Okay, on the topic of ethics and AI, I wanted to highlight a project that was, the paper was published at the end of last year, The Ethics of Disclosing the Use of Artificial Intelligence Tools in Writing Scholarly Manuscripts. So in this project, we collaborated with David Resnick from NIEHS, and through the discussion, developed best practices for disclosing the use of artificial intelligence tools within the text, as well as disclosing their use overall. So we developed some best practices for disclosure. So for instance, when you're disclosing something like this in the text, it's important because these models change so quickly and because their use is really impacted by the individual who is carrying out the command or constructing the prompt or any of those types of things. We need to be able to disclose which model, when it was used, and by who, to be able to capture that temporal perspective. So you can see an example citation there. In terms of disclosing their use, there are three main things to keep in mind. So you will want to disclose their use as free text in the introduction or methods section. In this place, you'll honestly describe who used the large language models, when and how, using what prompts, and disclose what sections of the text are affected by those large language models, by those applications. You'll also want to recognize this through in-text citations and among references. The reason that you want to include this outside of just the methods section is because this will allow you to improve indexing and findability of that work. And so you can see that same syntax for that citation. And then finally, including it as supplementary material or in appendices, you can use your prompts, you can use other aspects that are part of that research activity. Okay, so moving on to talk a little bit about openness. I'll still be highlighting a few projects just to orient you about different types of artificial intelligence types of initiatives that are happening, and look forward to chatting about that here in a moment. So, okay, before we start, let's talk a little bit about open science. So open science, what is it? So we understand the concept of open, we understand the concept of science, but UNESCO came up with a recommendation on open science where they actually establish a clear definition about what open science is. And that clear definition and the context of recommendations around the open science definition actually help us better understand how open science works, its impact on communities and people, the importance of infrastructures in that process, and so on. So, so here we can see open science is defined as an inclusive construct that combines various movements and practices to make scientific knowledge openly available. It increases scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefit of science and society. And it opens the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. Okay, so with this in mind, a group of us, so this is collaborators, Mohammed, Sergey, and Tony are listed below, decided to take this concept of open science and think about it with the intersections of generative AI. So where do we see benefits and challenges in terms of thinking about many of these quickly opening processes and platforms and how they may be impacted by generative AI? So in the construct that was developed by UNESCO, they basically identified a taxonomy of open science, where we look at open scientific knowledge, open science infrastructures, open engagement of societal actors, and open dialogue with other knowledge systems. So open dialogue or open scientific knowledge refers to open access to scientific publications, which you might imagine, but it's also data, metadata, open educational resources, software, all sorts of types of things. The open science infrastructures, we're really thinking about virtual and physical resources, including scientific equipment, sets of instruments, knowledge resources such as collections, platforms, repositories, those types of things. When we refer to open engagement of societal actors, we're actually talking about extending collaboration between scientists and those beyond the scientific community. So we're thinking about a much more inclusive and broader perspective in the way that we're carrying out our science. And then finally, open dialogue with other knowledge systems really takes into account different knowledge holders, the knowledge they have, how we are recognizing the diverse knowledge systems and the diversity of knowledge in the context of equitable access and rights. And this really, I think, highlights the importance of respectful processes and also welcoming a wider range of people into the scientific discord. So what did we find? So we found several positive impacts of generative AI upon open science, as well as some negative impacts as well. So as far as open scientific knowledge, a number of things that you might imagine seeing as positive impacts from this intersection. So you can imagine using generative AI applications can help researchers cope with information overload. It can be helpful in detecting errors or issues, inconsistencies in data sets. It could be applied in creating synthetic data sets or providing additional lift or decreasing burden in evaluation processes, whether it's through like scholarly peer review or other kinds of activities. Challenges, on the other hand, it makes it easier to generate false information, fake publications. I'm sure we've seen a lot of that in the scholarly literature, this kind of concern about those types of things. Generating fabricated data sets that support hypotheses that may not be accurate and having it be very difficult in order to tell that that's happened, code inaccuracies, and compromised confidentiality. When we look at some of these other items, either the open science infrastructures, the engagement of societal actors and other knowledge systems, we're still seeing a number of the same types of things where we're looking at an enhancement in the efficiency of the way that science is carried out, providing more inclusive opportunities for people to engage with scholarship itself, leveling the playing field for citizen scientists, helping to facilitate outreach and communication of scholarly information. But again, on the other side of that, there are these issues that must be realized and considered relating to bias, compromising reproducibility, increasing issues of inequity, because there's perhaps some kind of monetization of the activity, increasing biases, and so on. So this isn't, it's still a very complicated space. And this was really meant to be an exploration of the topic, just to push on these topics a little bit. And so we're really looking forward to more information and more feedback from the community. We imagine the preprint will be placed on archive sometime in the next couple of days, and then we'll eagerly look for feedback from the community. So we really hope to get more information on that. Yes.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
So someone is asking, in terms of citations for AI, even within a single large language model, it seems like you can get different responses for the same prompt. If someone else is not able to replicate these findings from a large language model, how can you verify these results?
Okay, I'm sorry, could you read that again?
Yeah, so it said, in terms of like citations for AI, even within a single large language model, it seems you can get different responses for the same prompt. If someone else is not able to replicate the findings from a large language model, how can you verify these results?
Okay, great. So yeah, that's a good question about the citations. So I think hopefully everyone has had the chance to read, something in the scholarly literature, in the popular press about the fact that, these applications can actually generate citations themselves. It's very difficult to be able to maintain consistency, or to be able to know that you're going to get what you hope you do. These best practices are actually for the humans in terms of how we're representing that. But with respect to being able to reproduce a snapshot that was in the past at a given time, I agree. These types of things are nearly impossible to reproduce kind of out in the wild. I suppose under, careful consideration and careful, in a closed system, you could theoretically reproduce that, which may be something that would be useful depending on the type of project. Okay. Okay, so also on the topic of open infrastructures, I wanted to share a really terrific project with everyone, because one of the goals of this project is creating AI-ready data sets. So this is a terrific project. This is at the National Institutes of Health. It's called the Comparative Genomics Resource, or CGR. And in the CGR, we're really looking at maximizing the benefit of eukaryotic research organisms and their data to biomedical research. So you may think to yourself, if you're working in clinical research, I'm working on humans, and I may not be interested in other types of organisms. But I think it's important to underscore the important role that comparative genomics plays in modern biomedical research. In using comparative genomics techniques, we can begin to see and understand the human form, what genes may be implicated in a particular disease, certain kinds of biomarkers that could be used in terms of incorporating for diagnosis or other types of things. And so this has been a terrific investment in biomedicine and in research. there are a number of key things to note here. So there are, I think everyone is probably aware, the fantastic tooling and data resources that are available through the National Center for Biotechnology Information at the National Library of Medicine at NIH. And what we're seeing with CGR is really a doubling down and investment in improving those data and tooling resources. So there's all of these terrific applications. They've really enhanced the data resources, not only the breadth, but the depth of these data resources and how we're able to use it. Enhanced interoperability, more user-friendly interfaces in terms of how we're accessing and using the resources. And then finally, what I think is especially exciting from my perspective, in addition to all of this wonderful work, is that there's very intentional time and energy being spent on enhancing opportunities for community collaboration. That could be through curation and making that community curation or community curated resources more widely available, as well as more training and educational materials so that these resources can be folded into how students are learning. Yeah.
So, in regards to that, it's great that there is community outreach. I guess the question is like, are we developing metrics or measures to determine like the level of community engagement? And, when we talk about some of these data sets, we always think about the fact that, we have lots of pockets in which there are just gaps in the data. So, like, what is the effort in trying to close some of those gaps?
Sure, great question. So there are a number of metrics that they're using in order to assess the success of this program. So the typical types of metrics that you might imagine in terms of like downloads, data citations, those types of things. But there are also assessments that are happening under the hood where they're looking at completeness of available data or those types of things. And so it provides an opportunity to be able to understand areas for potential investment in terms of time and energy, but it also helps to understand the robustness of work as it's happening. I will note this genomic data is, it's interesting, right? Because you can think about it in two ways in terms of time investment. So do you want to refine resources where there's quite a bit of data? Or do you want to look at perhaps genomic data that may be underrepresented, but could actually be quite useful for all sorts of different biological activities? One thing I can think of is one of the individuals who is on this working group works in hibernation, right? So there are very different animals that are used for that kind of modeling or that kind of comparative genomics work than we might see in a traditional kind of typical lab environment. So yeah, thank you. Okay, also open science infrastructure. So I also want to give a plug out to repositories. We have the great pleasure of being part of the Invenio RDM open source community, our team at Galter Library, and we have been contributing to this community now for 5 or 6 years. This software serves as the infrastructure that runs Zenodo. So I don't know if anybody has data sets or presentations or posters that you've deposited to Zenodo, but Invenio RDM is the code base that runs that platform. It also runs our local repository Prism here at Feinberg School of Medicine. So we're really happy about that and glad to be able to provide that kind of infrastructure and excited about the work that's happening in the open source community to continue to refine and advance that work. In the right-hand side of that slide, I just wanted to point out, again, kind of doubling down on that team or community sort of theme, that there are also a number of things that benefit from a team-based approach in this kind of a project as well. So open source development, as you know, you can imagine, you obviously need people working together to be able to accomplish the goals and tasks that have been set in a development timeline or roadmap, obviously. But I think that this collaboration benefits in many different ways because not only are we able to connect to outside activities and ensure harmonization, ensure interoperability, implement best practices and standards so that we can be a much more much more available, much more useful technology. We're also developing different features to support collaborative science itself. So for instance, making it easy to share files, making it easy to cite individual things that are within repositories, the persistent identifier infrastructure. So we're looking at ways to highlight individuals as well as their organizations. So I hope everybody who is watching has their ORCID. And if you don't, please get an ORCID. It's your unique person identifier, and it integrates into a number of scholarly workflows. It is an opportunity to be able to work closely with users on user experience and accessibility issues. So making sure that when we create infrastructure, it's something that people can use and it is easy to use. And then features related to bringing people together. So one of the features that I'm most excited about in the last release is this communities feature. And so what it is the ability to create an attractive grouping of resources that are created, for instance, for your lab or for a project, an open source community, or for a conference or so on. So that's really important. And then finally, up in the upper right-hand corner in the dark pink, there are also a number of community aspects that we try and practice in order to support community activities. We have inclusive governance. There's a strong culture of peer-to-peer mentoring. The open source community is unbelievable, really, really wonderful group. We do a lot of collaborative events, biweekly calls. There's the Discord channels. There is a very clear and intentional recognition and celebration of a wide range of contributions. So it's not just the people who are writing lines and lines of code, although that's essential. It's also the individuals who are doing testing of the software, who are contributing to outreach or demonstrations or those types of things. And all of that's funded on, or facilitated on one of the most useful collaborative platforms, which is GitHub. And this work is being used right now in the context of efforts at the National Institutes of Health to enhance the ecosystem for research data sharing. So we are one of the funded projects on the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, or GRAE for short. You can see the list of objectives around the circle. All of this I can get behind. It all makes sense. I'm really glad to see it all pulled together in one package. I'd like to point out the kind of light orange circle and also the title of the slide, which is this co-opetition model. So what this is a very unique approach where you take a number of different actors in the space. So you can see the list of repositories along the bottom. We are, even though many of us are open, completely open, we're non-commercial, there is a bit of a competition, right? We're all kind of providing this similar architecture, but we're working together on those things that help us all do a better job. What are those best practices in terms of facilitating more fair data? So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And how do we come together to ensure that that becomes just part of the way we work. So you can see the objectives around the outside of that oval. And then the goals of the generalist repository ecosystem are outlined here on the right, which is make it easier for researchers to share data, enable the improved discoverability of NIH-funded data across those repositories, support greater reproducibility of research, and ensure that data that are associated with publications are readily available, avoid data duplication, and then encourage our NIH-funded investigators to be both contributors and consumers. Reuse that data. Go see if there's data out there that you can use for different kinds of analyses. So it's an exciting time for sure. And then thinking about reusing data, if you deposit data, you want to know that that data has been used, right? You want it to be cited, just like a publication. I think we want data to be first-class research objects like we observe with publications. And so until that point, until recently, it hasn't been possible to do. It's been difficult to see mentions to data sets in text. And information about the usage of data is stored in various locations. There's not a good way to pull that in. Yes. Yeah.
Rachel, you raised your hand. Do you want to ask your question?
Okay, no problem. And so we are working on a project called Make Data Count to be able to promote open data metrics and enable evaluation and reward of research data reuse and impact. We're working with the community to ensure that data are used and cited in open and transparent and responsible ways. So we're building open infrastructure. So again, on that open infrastructure point and community-based standards, everything is very collaborative. We're advocating for these good practices through outreach and adoption, and we're contextualizing the content, all of this great data with evidence-based bibliometric studies. So how are we doing this? So Make Data Count, one of the primary projects at Make Data Count is something called the Global Data Citation Corpus. And you can see that here. This project is funded by Wellcome and in collaboration with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to develop a comprehensive corpus that incorporates data citations from different sources into a centralized, open, and publicly accessible community resource. And so where are we right now? Well, right now we have the MVP. So there was just a wonderful release here at the beginning of the year. And we're continuing to enhance and augment the data that are available for this citation. So it's been very exciting as we continue to see the growth of the data and look forward very much to continued efforts in this space. Okay, finally, just thinking about how we build a strong foundation. As you know from the earlier slide, I mentioned that research is a team sport, right? So when we think about the types of things that we need to have in place for AI projects, data, software and tooling, but it's also the people and it's the culture that help to make these projects go. It helps them be efficient, it helps them be creative, and it's incredibly important that we have a wide range of perspectives as we're thinking about this work moving forward. So research is absolutely a team sport, and it's all of these different roles and expertise, action, and impacts that help us achieve a common goal. So I wanted to bring it back to the library. So I've been in libraries now for over 15 years. And I was originally trained as a biochemist, and I loved the part of my work that was about thinking about information, thinking about how it's collected, organized, stored, made available. How do I use it? And happened to actually stumble into this field a bit by accident, but I haven't looked back since. So it's been an incredibly important and wonderful way to think about my own perspectives, but also to be able to learn more and more every day about research information, about knowledge creation, access, preservation, and so on. So I cannot more strongly recommend the importance of having the ultimate information professionals at the table for these types of projects, which are the librarians. So I wanted to highlight just a paper that we published at the end of last year, where we interviewed various different roles, people who work in libraries in different roles about generative AI. So, I mean, we're in this somewhat funny place, right? Because it's still so new, but it's also, there's so much that's been done already. And so just trying to understand how we are thinking about it in libraries, where our goal, so our job is really about thinking about how you do your work. How do we support you? How do we make sure you have the right training? How do we make sure you have the right resources? How do we make sure that we have everything in place so that you can do your best? So we were curious about how individuals in libraries are thinking about this. So we talked to people with technical perspectives. We talked to individuals who are involved with acquiring information, licensing, and bringing that into the library, storing and describing the information, and so on. And it was in teaching, actually, incorporating it into reference types of work and engagement with students. And so, you know, as you might imagine, and as you've probably seen in some of these other things, lots of positive feelings, lots of potential concerns or things to be aware of. So, I mean, libraries are just like everywhere else, where we're thinking about some of the opportunities that this brings to our work and how we're supporting our community, as well as trying to be ever mindful of the challenges that are presented by technologies such as this, so that we're always supporting responsible use in the way that you're using our resources. Yeah.
So how do you see the role of the librarian like evolving with, all of this AI and especially generative AI? I mean, it feels in this moment like it's a free for all. And I think I would just curious of where you see that role, that librarian role in this free for all.
Right. That's a great question. To be honest, I think I've seen a lot of my colleagues in the field jump on AI like it's the most important thing to think about right now. And I mean, believe me, I'm very personally interested and I'm thinking about it all the time myself. But fundamentally, the important thing about libraries is to ensure that our foundational values and our foundational work is happening, right? And so when you think about, yeah, I mean, when I think about what a librarian's job might be like now versus 20 years ago, it's very different in terms of how they're carrying out that work. But to be very honest, it's also the same. It's the same. Like it's the same dependable work. You have information professionals that are, coming to the table. They've got expertise to assist with information, with knowledge, helping to make those workflows easier, more successful. And that's something that's been in place for as long as libraries have existed. So I tend to make that very fundamental, foundational perspective center to how I think about our work. But I will say, I really encourage everybody on our team and myself. Sometimes I have to encourage myself to try something new or to learn something new. I think it's important to kind of put yourself out there, think creatively, get to hear from communities that are outside of where you typically work, so you're not in an echo chamber. And eventually we all kind of come out the other side with hopefully a good perspective and lots of good information. I also think that those types of interactions are important because it helps others who are busy with their work and thinking about their research or their practice to understand maybe what it is that libraries are doing now as we're living out our mission. So yeah, thanks for that question. So in addition to the strong team as an important part of the foundation, it is also important to think about culture as a strong factor of a foundation for this kind of work. Most of the important work that's happening in research isn't technological, it's cultural. So we're reinventing work to be less transactional and more transformational. And we see a shift from checking things off of a list to doing work for purpose and connection. So it's really important that we're empowering teams, all of our teams, no matter what our roles are here. We're, I'm sure, in very different roles, but we each have a role to play on that team in terms of creating a welcoming space, bringing people in to have conversations, learning from one another, figuring out why are we here and what are we doing, and having that shared sense of purpose. Yes. Yes.
So since the advent of large language model tools, journals are concerned about an uptick in submissions with potentially problematic provenance. The concern seems increasingly beyond the ability of smaller journals to properly monitor. You must have some thoughts about this in the context of the role that libraries can play in managing this post-production.
Sure. I think the question from the audience is a good one. It is a great one, actually. And I do have thoughts. My primary thought is this is a very uncertain time right now. Not to push back on it too much, but I do think that there probably need to be several checkpoints along the way to ensure research integrity, to ensure good practices. And that happens at the point of the investigator, maybe the mentor or the lab where this kind of work is happening. It's important at the institutional level and so on. So while I don't think that libraries are responsible for figuring that out, and I don't think that's what was implied, but I just want to be clear. I think it's going to take all of us working together to try and figure out how to do that. It will also be probably a combination of culture types of steps. So workflow, how do we work? How do we reward? What are the incentives? Those types of things that help people work in certain ways. And it'll probably be technological advancements, checking for generated content or those types of things. I mean, the main point, stay tuned. I'm not sure, but we'll be paying attention to this through the years, through the months, through the weeks as it's going lately. So just finally, just to conclude, I wanted to give a huge shout out to our team over at Galter Health Sciences Library and Learning Center. And for anybody who is tuned in, who is not on on campus, I would encourage you to reach out to your libraries. They are the ultimate information professionals. There are usually a wide range of incredible resources, access to data, pointers for connections and collaborations on campus. So that's usually a pretty good place to start if you have questions or if you need help. And I also want to thank colleagues and collaborators. And then I'll point out, I am really fortunate for incredible support for these kinds of collaborative projects. It's great to see this kind of collaborative work being supported, and I'm grateful to our funders. And then again, grateful to partners and collaborators that are listed here. So with that, I'll stop and welcome questions. Yeah.
I have a question. So, do you have some so if we want to do some research, right, we need the resource and to know university what's available. Do you have some special, in library, do you collect Northwestern medical school, their publication, what they can do, so what the code they wrote there? So we can just go to you, said, oh, I want to do this, and who in Northwestern who already done this, we can borrow from them or use their resources, something like this.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've got a couple of answers there. So there are resources on campus that will help you see some of the types of things that people are doing. The first of these is the Feinberg Faculty Profile site that is maintained by the Dean's Office. And so on that, you'll be able to see publications that people write. You'll be able to search across those titles. As well as their biographical sketches. So if there's a particular, let's say you're looking for a particular technique or something like that. And then also the university has a profiling service called Northwestern Scholars that may be helpful. And then of course, you're always welcome to come in and talk to us. So one of the things that I personally, I worked for a long time where I was working directly with researchers and helping them find what they needed, kind of boots on the ground. And I've helped people who have said, I'm looking for someone who can do this particular technique, and I can't find anybody, and would help do a search of the region. So this is when I was in St. Louis, but look at the St. Louis, Kansas City, Chicago areas and look that method up and see if there are labs that are working on it. So that's something we can help with. I will note this is a great, as long as I am completely celebrating the library here, I will tell you, we have every department, center, program, institute at Feinberg School of Medicine has a go-to person. And so if you go to the library website and click on, there's a liaison librarian or I need librarian assistance, you'll be able to find those contacts. But if not, you can contact me directly and I'll put you in touch.
So now, people deposit their code to the GitHub.
Mhm.
How do you think it's safe or not safe? Because if you use university computer, it's directly connect to the Feinberg Medical School and the R drive. So it's kind of like a lot of patient information and everything in there. So make me nervous to download those things. So I have to get another computer myself to download all these things. So what do you think?
So thanks for that question. Not knowing the specifics, I can't really answer specifically about that, but What I would do is just encourage you if there's IT support, just to get their confirm with them, because I know that Feinberg IT have been incredibly helpful and very diligent at making sure that that everything is happening in a secure environment. So I would encourage you to reach out, and they'll probably be able to answer that question. Yeah.
So if you have a new computer lab at Galter, for example, who is the contact if a program needs to use this for a course?
Great question. You can contact our admin team. So Rebecca Flores is the person, or you can contact me directly and I will put you in touch. So my, let's see, do I have my, here is my email. So kristi.holmes@northwestern.edu, and I will put you in touch. It's a great computer lab, so yes. Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could say a few words more about using AI to review scholarly works, like the pluses and minuses. I saw that on your thought piece that's coming out, and efficiency. Maybe that would be helpful. But yeah, anyway, I'd be
Yeah.
appreciative of your thoughts.
Sure. No, it's I've got to admit, as somebody who also reviews, super tempting, right? Because it's so much work to do a good job reviewing an article. So I think, it does depend on the space. If you're in a closed space, a closed system, and you can use a generative AI application in behind a firewall, that's a different thing than just plugging it into Chat GPT. I do think there are issues with pushing the data that are in these publications out into the models. And I know that there are a number of journals that have come out and said that you cannot use that for peer review, and it is not to be used for grant review either.
People are doing it anyway.
Do I think people are doing it anyway? I would imagine so. And I would like to think it's because people are busy. I think people are busy. Everyone's super busy. What I'd like to see is maybe more opportunities to find efficiencies and decrease burden in appropriate ways. That's what I really want. Yes. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you, and I'll look forward to future AI forums as an attendee. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristi.